Leslie Hewitt is an artist based in New York. She has become internationally recognized for sculptural photographs, photographs that she creates that function both as images, as pictorial images, but also as objects. She does this, I think the importance of this is they really heighten our sense of the visual. She's very interested in opticality and optics and how photography is really transformed the way that we see and how we see, what we see, and the photographs really heighten that awareness, that self-awareness. We become very self-aware of ourselves in the process of looking at these sculptural photographs. We become very aware of how we're physically positioned in relationship to them, how the photographs are, positioned in relationship to the surrounding architecture of the gallery space. And so she really, I think her work is really important in prompting us to reconsider how photography affects not only the way that we experience the present, but also how we come to understand the past. The exhibition comprises two bodies of works, two multi-part series of photographs that we come to understand as an overall series, but also we appreciate the individual works on their own. One of them is called A Series of Projections from 2010. It's 12 color photographs of black and white images that Hewitt projected onto her studio wall. And then the other series is called Blue Skies, Warm Sunlight from 2011. This is a series of six photographs that are framed in these very object-like frames that lean against the wall and are placed very architecturally throughout the space, and then one frame photograph that hangs on the wall. These photographs in Blue Skies, Warm Sunlight feature a shifting combination of different objects that Hewitt staged within her studio space. A Series of Projections from 2010 features imagery that Hewitt projected onto her studio wall. She layered imagery from photojournalism from the 1960s, but only fragments of images, so we don't really see the entire picture of what she's presenting. She layers these images over images of domestic interiors, almost still life images that she shot herself. The combination of these fragments of photojournalism, things that happened, important events from the 1960s, alongside these very quiet domestic interior scenes, is really meant to underscore how historical imagery is built not only of the eventful, of these moments of historical significance, but of moments of insignificance that even on the days that moments of extreme historical importance happened, those days were also characterized by the uneventful, by the everyday, and how there's this kind of overlap. And even within the most sort of historically significant moments, there's an element of the everyday in them. And I think that much of Hewitt's work is really about finding, overcoming the challenge of how you represent that. How do you represent that everyday life is not only comprised of the eventful, but also the uneventful. She's also very informed by 17th century Dutch still life painting. What was really phenomenal about this painting, what was really significant about Dutch still life painting was it presented everyday objects and effects and phenomena, but the way that the painters composed the scenes involving these objects really was meant to tell a story. It was meant to tell something that the objects signified beyond just their appearance as everyday things. They alluded to religious aspects or the socioeconomic status of who these objects belong to. So, really about this notion of very simple things, very ordinary things, having a significance beyond themselves. And also the sense of the sort of sculptural quality of these images, I think, was very interesting to Leslie Hewitt. She did a lot of research looking at this particular kind of this particular moment in art history, and I think it really informed not only, I think, the way that she presents the images in a series of projections, but also the sense of opticality, the sense of, prompting the viewer to look harder, to look closer, to think about, the meanings beyond what we're seeing on the surface. The way that she presents the photographs is in this kind of open grid format presented all across the wall. And the viewer is really intended to kind of try to, I think, the result of that presentation is such that we try to connect the different images. And I think that for Hewitt, cinema and filmmaking is a very significant influence on her work as well. And so by trying to connect these images between the different spaces that she set up between them, it almost functions the way that a jump cut in cinema works. A jump cut is a filmic technique where it sort of takes you from, it sort of jumps you across space and time through editing, through, just sort of like putting two different scenes together. And so it's this kind of cinematic shortcut, and I think, once again, Hewitt is really kind of making us more aware of how these visual techniques really alter and affect our way that we experience not only everyday life, but the past as well. The Bettman Archives is a collection of 19 million photographs that is now owned by the Corbis Corporation in Seattle, which licenses the rights to images. The Bettman Archives is the source of the photojournalistic imagery that Hewitt has fragmented and presents in a series of projections from 2010. Even though we can't really tell the original images, I think Hewitt really wants us to think about the way that archives or corporations such as Corbis hold control and hold authority over images, how they appear. Even though we take for granted that we see historical imagery in TV, in books, in magazines, in newspapers, and websites, and that imagery is kind of presented to us as kind of already there. There's a whole process by which this imagery is released to be used, and a series, and there's a system of control and authority that basically provides access to this imagery, and I think that this is a really important undercurrent and subtext of Hewitt's A Series of Projections work. The imagery in Blue Skies, Warm Sunlight features a changing assemblage of objects, a empty wood board, a book titled The Politics of Protest from 1971, which really chronicled the circumstances surrounding and the effect of the political protests of the 1960s, protests of the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement, and snapshots that feature atmospheric scenes, such as a blue sky with clouds. The assemblage of objects in each photograph changes. Sometimes elements are left out. Sometimes the wood board is propped up by the books in the image. Sometimes the snapshot is left on the floor. Sometimes it's propped on the wood board. This changing assemblage of the objects is really intended to change our relationship to these objects. Even though it's a very simple, very minimal presentation of phenomena, our relationship to them changes as we move through the space, as we move from each object to each object. And it really not only changes depending on how we're positioned within the space, but also it changes our perception of these objects. You know, what does it mean to have the wood board propped up on this very historically significant book? Or what happens when the book is propped up in a different way? What happens when the book is absent? What happens when the board is absent? What happens when the images are placed in a different way? It's really intended to, I think, talk about how our perspective on things changes based on our particular situation. The placement of the photographs at an angle on the wall necessitated Hewitt to shift the angle of her photography of the objects within her studio space to account for that angle. And so once again, our perception, the way that we're seeing this photograph has very much to do with a sense of space, a sense of sculpture. I think a lot of this work in particular, as well as other works that Hewitt has created that not only present photographs as sculptures in and of themselves, but also depict these very sculptural arrangements of objects, really point to her training as a sculptor and her interest in creating a more sculpturally defined and experienced photographic imagery. Hewitt presents these different photographs in a very non-linear fashion so that we not only really kind of assess how they're presented within the gallery space and really try to create a connection between them, but once again also to shift our position towards this imagery, shift our perspective on what we're seeing and how we put it together based on how we move through the space. Someone who comes into the gallery through a certain trajectory and experiences the photographs in one way is going to have a completely different take on the piece than someone who approaches the photographs from a different part of the gallery and reads them. So even though the images, you know, are very much part of a series, very much, you know, sort of work with the same kind of objects that reconfigure these objects from image to image, the way that she's assembled them in the gallery really shifts our perspective on them, shifts our reading of this imagery, and really underscores, I think, you know, how she makes us more aware of our participation in the act of seeing.